Good evening, Moon Princess here, and tonight we are going to talk about a true crime case, and this is the missing persons case of Relisha Rudd. This case happened in 2014, so 8 years ago, and Relisha was 8 years old. At the time, she was 4 feet tall, between 70 and 80 pounds. She was born in DC on October 29th, 2005. Prior to moving to the shelter in 2012, she lived in an apartment with her mother, elder sister, and 2 brothers. She loved playing with her little brothers, assisting with chores. She was even quite motherly towards her siblings. The shelter was described by one source as a barely livable place infested with bedbugs and as being no playground for children. Her grandma, Melissa Young, remembers how much she loved to help people with their babies. She was so willing to change people's diapers, push their strollers, feed their children, and birth them. Relisha slept with a teddy bear named Baby. Her mother, Shamika, describes her daughter, Relisha, as the kind of person people fell in love with right away, that she was everyone's best friend. I don't know why, but this descriptor almost gives me feelings that maybe she was envious of her daughter. I don't know, maybe it's just me. So according to sources, relatives of Relisha say that her mom and her boyfriend Wheeler permitted Relisha to interact alone, one-on-one, with a man named Tatum that was in his 50s, which is just odd. No relation whatsoever. Okay? Individuals from her school disclosed also that she would appear in dirty clothing. Her hair would be disheveled, and she would be very hungry, her stomach empty. So these are clear indications that she really wasn't being cared for. They also would note that she never wanted to return home, to the point where she actually faked asthma attacks to avoid going home. According to the Washington Post, Shamika Young had a track record which involved repeated reports, disclosures to social workers. In one instance, Relisha and the other children were found in a very unclean home, trash everywhere, cigarette butts and ashes. So according to a DCFS report, there were mentions of medical neglect, instances where children were left on their own to bathe and received no supervision from Ms. Young. It is believed that Young was physically abusing her daughter, Relisha Rudd, and she was suffering from hunger, food scarcity, a lack of nourishment. Was last seen on March 1st, according to CCTV footage. This is the DC case. She went missing from a DC homeless shelter. She was living there with the rest of her family. They'd been living there for the last 18 months before her disappearance. But she had gone to a motel in DC with Khalil Tatum, a 51-year-old man. And Tatum worked as a janitor at the shelter where Relisha was living. She was not reported missing until several weeks following her last sighting. In February, she had simply stopped attending classes at her elementary school. She fell through the cracks because nobody actually followed up. School officials had been informed that Relisha was sick, or so they say. This is according to NBC News 4. When investigators looked into this further, they learned that Tatum had been impersonating a doctor with claims to DC city officials worried about Relisha that she was unwell due to a neurological disorder and was receiving treatment. Many officials were worried about Relisha, and he claimed that she was unwell due to a neurological disorder and was receiving treatment. I don't know how this flew. I think it's because people didn't bother to look into anything. That's like, how much effort they put into concerns about her disappearance, So documentation and descended to the homeless shelter. Upon showing up at the shelter on March 19th, they come to discover there is no Dr. Tatum, and Relisha is nowhere to be seen at this point. We're unable to find Relisha. Following this series of events, a missing persons report was filed for Relisha finally. But, some people say, like, in the school system's defense that they were and are overwhelmed, They had tried to investigate her whereabouts and asked after Relisha, after repeated missed school days, they had been seeking additional information. They likely figured they should just wait. Meanwhile, they go to inquire about like 50 other similar cases. So by the time they get back to Relisha, a lot of time had already passed since they last looked into the matter. You might also wonder, where is their mother in the midst of all of this? Well, good question. Being super suspicious is where she is. But would this have happened to somebody of greater socioeconomic status and wealth? Probably not. So to me, there's a disparity here. And the circumstances of this case really illustrate a systemic problem in addition to problems surrounding missing persons cases in general. So, by this time, so much information and evidence has just been lost. Time between when she went missing and when they actually started involving police and detectives is such a long stretch that they lose a lot of opportunities and lines of inquiry about her disappearance. But what it really tells me is that Relisha was never seen as a priority, and even if they say she was, these actions on her behalf just do not send this message. Since she had been missing for a month by this time, the investigation was underway. But at this point, I guess the whole city has now become involved in this case with people searching for Relisha. But, would have been a lot better if it happened way sooner. But yeah, people want to bring the family closure. So there's that. The police, like I said, they get involved, and on March 20th, they issue a press release and all the information on the case at that point. And Amber Alert went out that day, and the belief that she was likely with Tatum on March 20th at a Red Roof Inn in Prince George's County, Maryland. Tatum's wife, Andrea, was found shot to death. Also important to understand that Tatum was very familiar with Relisha and someone that she trusted. She had left the shelter with him before, gone places one-on-one with him on numerous occasions. They had gone shopping together before. They had gone to Disney on Ice, and for her Christmas, he had purchased her a tablet. They had some kind of relationship that had developed over time. It was not a random guy she had met once or twice. He had wormed his sick way into her life and built a sense of trust, which enabled him to abduct her. And a lot of it sounds like grooming to me. So police believe the vehicle he abducted her in may have been a white 1976 GMC truck, a truck which, on March 21st, was discovered in Hyattsville, Maryland, though they believe absent of any indications it had been occupied by an 8-year-old girl, or so it would seem. So Relisha's mother, Shemika Young, trusted him with her daughter. So I guess it gives you the idea that she had gained the mother's trust as well. So the FBI starts offering a $25,000 reward for information surrounding her case, though I'm not sure if this increased or not. Also, Prince George's County Police have been offering a reward for information related to Andrea Tatum's murder and anything that might help them apprehend Khalil Tatum. So Relisha, like I said, was last sighted March 1st at a DCO motel. And FBI released CCTV footage from February 26th from Tatum and Relisha at another hotel in DC Northeast. And in the footage, they are walking down a hallway. Relisha is wearing pink boots and a purple Helly Hansen jacket with white stripes, which seems like it might have been one of her favorites. I'm not sure though. On March 2nd, according to police, Tatum purchased contractor-sized black trash bags, I'm guessing, and they observed that he spent a lot of time in Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens of Northeast DC, which is on the border of Maryland. It's on the Maryland border. Tatum was then added to FBI's wanted list, and Prince George's County, Maryland, issued an arrest warrant in connection with the murder of his wife. So I am here wondering, did he buy the bags to dispose of Relisha? Is she still alive? What were his plans after he abducted her? Things that we still don't really know at this point. Do you think he murdered Relisha? I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you want to comment on the video, that'd be great. Anyways, so Kenilworth Park became an area of interest. They conducted grid searches on foot. They brought along dive teams and searched small bodies of water within the park. This search of the park took place on March 31st at 12:30 p.m. So, plot twist, police find Tatum's body at Kenilworth Park. He had been shot to death, and his head wound was self-inflicted. He was found 36 hours after he passed away. After finding him, they continued looking for Relisha for another 4 to 5 hours, but were unable to locate her. Her case, as previously mentioned, really made people wonder how this happened to her. By September of 2014, school district officials looked into her case. As a result, more than 24 policy changes occurred, though they continue to argue that these changes would not have prevented this from happening to her. Though this entire premise is contradictory, making all these changes but standing by, saying you did everything you could and it's not your fault. Not saying it's the district's fault, but the system in place perpetuated the continuation of this and sending this message that she didn't matter. How in most worlds, in most schools, a child missing for that length of time, especially at her age, would not have gone unnoticed or not addressed. This is not normal. It's not justifiable. Just saying it would not have changed anything is kind of rubbing salt in the wound, to say the least. Some other changes proposed as a result of Relisha's disappearance include unexcused absences are addressed, as well as how homeless shelter employee background checks are conducted, and the handling of fraternization between families and staff of homeless shelters. The system is supposed to have her back. March 3rd, 2015, DC Mayor Muriel Bowser held a press conference to share an update on the investigation and talked again about public safety and policy changes to protect children at risk. Additionally, the police chief, Kathy Lanier, shared the case is still open and active. December 2015, police shared about another search for Relisha outside of Kenilworth Park, though it bore no fruit in her investigation. On April 7th, 2016, another search was conducted of National Arboretum over a 2-day period. 60 searchers were involved with FBI and CMEC, divers, and cadaver dogs. Nothing new arose. Relisha's grandmother had wanted them to search there again and believes the first search was not sufficient. I want to note that misleading information her family gave the school and city greatly impeded the investigation into her disappearance, so that's important to remember. Interestingly enough, the shelter Relisha and her mother lived at has since closed up. At this point, it has been 8 years since Relisha went missing. In 2020, a new police chief has taken it upon himself to revive efforts to solve Relisha's case. and an age progression photo was created to help them better identify Relisha on the off chance she is in fact still alive. So that leads me to believe that she may not be dead. The photo was created in 2022 of what she would look like at 16. Though it would be wonderful to find her alive, I still have my doubts personally. Because in my mind, I would think he committed suicide because he killed 2 women. But maybe that's not what he regretted and why he committed suicide. Who knows? I get the feeling that he was obsessed with Relisha and that a lot of the story revolves around his fixation on her. It's just unusual, you know. Some think she may have become embroiled in human trafficking, which might explain why there is no sign of her, that she vanished without a trace, and also, from what I read, Maryland does have a sort of like hub of sex trafficking in that area. Or at least, like I said, from what I read. There are also great suspicions surrounding Relisha's mother, Shamika, and her stepfather, Antonio Wheeler, that they posted photos of cash and luxury items on social media around the time she disappeared. Shamika lived with her daughter and her 3 boys at the shelter, according to Ebony News, an Ebony News article. Allowed a complete stranger to become close with her daughter. He was very charismatic, always giving gifts and overly nice to a certain extent, to where the fraternizing policy of the shelter should have been enforced. Her mother did not report her daughter missing, but Relisha's school did. The social media posts around the time of her disappearance showed photos of Shamika and her fiance, Antonio Wheeler, wearing new Jordans, holding a new cell phone and cash in his mouth. So there were lies about whereabouts of her daughter, school absences which went on long after they should have been looked into. So DC General shelter workers failed to notice the gift giving and inappropriate time being spent with the janitor and 8-year-old girl. Overworked social workers who had noted some signs of abuse and poor conditions as early as her infancy allowed her to remain in the home with Shamika. So regarding social workers and DHS, the ratio of families at DC General to case managers for those families is 26 to 1. With that kind of caseload, it's not hard to see how Relisha's case manager might have missed the many warning signs about her precarious situation, that or maybe they failed to take action because they were overwhelmed. I don't know. I feel like that doesn't help for sure. So improper contact between DC General staff and female residents of the shelter. In 2010, 2 employees of the shelter were fired for allegedly attempting to trade favors for sex with residents of the shelter. According to news sources, Shamika Young attacked her mother and a protective order was taken out against her. That she and 2 others attacked her back in 2014. The temporary protective order required Shamika, Relisha's mom, to have no contact with her mother or husband, George Turner, in any manner, including phone, text, or even social media contact, or even through a third party, until the hearing. And I believe that the protection was extended after the hearing, but I'm not entirely sure. I just thought that was an interesting thing to note. So the Wilco's show. While on the show, statements were made by people involved. Antonio Wheeler, Shamika's significant other, maybe the word we considered Relisha's stepfather. I'm not sure if that was like in name or like legally, but either way, he explains Relisha's relatives had thought she was attending a pool party with Tatum's granddaughter, while Shamika said she thought Relisha had been at her sister's house with her mom, Melissa Young, hence why Relisha was not reported missing for such a lengthy period of time. That still doesn't make any sense. She also claims she did not have phone to contact her mother, which is very hard to believe in 2014. When prompted by the show, Wheeler shares his belief that Shamika and Melissa Young likely had a hand in what happened to Relisha. There is also a podcast, Through the Cracks, that I was supposed to be discussing this. I haven't listened to it, but it's something to look into if you're interested. Also, I read that her mom refused to take a polygraph. So, read that Melissa Young, Shamika's mother, when she was a kid, had struggled with providing her children stable housing, and after an altercation with another parent, had her kids taken away. So Shamika was taken away, as well as Ashley, Relisha's aunt. So while in foster care, Shamika and her siblings had a really hard time, and Shamika had some behavioral problems. She ended up placed in a mental health facility for children specifically, and her sister also had some challenges too. But when she aged out of foster care, she had nowhere to stay. And so she ended up staying at the shelter, the DC General Shelter, which Relisha later disappears from. So Reddit mentioned that while Shamika felt comfortable enough trusting Tatum to the care of her daughter Relisha, her mother claims to have felt suspicious about him from the get-go. But I don't know, they both kind of sketch me out a bit. Just like they don't seem very consistent. There's a quote that I read. I asked, and I believe this is Melissa, I asked who he was, and she said he was a friend. He was Relisha's godfather. I'm like, what is he doing with her? That's a man. Don't look right for your 8-year-old to be with a grown man who had no relation to her. Also, due to his working at the shelter, he was not even allowed to be seen with Relisha at the shelter. And that alone should make it weird. You know what I mean? He could have lost his job for that. I read somewhere that Shamika's mom was at some point charged with child neglect. So that's interesting. The last thing we're going to discuss for this case is human trafficking. So, there's been a strong concentration of human trafficking activity noted in Maryland. It is commonly thought that victims of human trafficking are more often immigrants, but this is really not true. And that is according to the National Center for Victims of Crime. And in fact, most children kidnapped are U.S. citizens who end up sold into the sex trade. The U.S. DOJ defines child sex trafficking as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a minor with the purpose to commercial a sex act. So traffickers are referred to as pimps, and they typically go after young children that are more vulnerable and do so by gaining their attention, their friendship, through love, gift giving, and provision of shelter. So they establish some type of relationship and they force them into prostitution by using abuse. This can be emotional, physical, psychological, and they sometimes even use drugs to keep them under their thumb. They often change the child's appearance, and they isolate and force them to move often as a way of conditioning loyalty into them. So that potential for her being in sex trafficking is something that I noticed came up a lot in my research. So, you're either in two camps. You either think that she ended up in sex trafficking, or you think she's dead. Okay, those are the most likely outcomes. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think? I feel like there is a strong possibility she ended up in sex trafficking. So, anyways, that's pretty much everything I have for this case. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Please like and subscribe if you did, and I hope to see you in my next one. Good night, Moonies.